The format for this meeting is an interview with an alcoholic, the hot seat, inside the alcoholic studio. A speaker will be asked a series of questions that range from their personal story, the steps, relationship with God, and carrying the message. There are no right answers, just a fun way, an interesting way to share the speaker's personal insight. Our speaker for tonight is Brian O. Timekeeper, please allow 90 seconds per question. The meeting may run slightly longer. Members, please feel free to leave if needed. Speaker, please say done when you have finished your answers. And please say pass on questions you prefer to skip. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's begin. Question number 1. Please generally describe, in your own words, our basic text, the book Alcoholics Anonymous.
The basic text, Alcoholics Anonymous, is the first 164 pages outlines the program of action, which is the first 12 steps of recovery, followed by stories in the book, which are stories of personal accounts of individuals and their experience, strength, and hope, drinking, and then coming to the program and working the program through all 12 steps. Done.
All right. Question 2. Are you an alcoholic? And if so, what personally makes you an alcoholic?
I am an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is 2 things. I was told when I came into the program that an alcoholic has a physical allergy, which is when I drink alcohol, the response to that is I want to have another, and I don't really have an off switch. The other thing is the mental obsession. So when I'm not drinking, I am either thinking about drinking or I am thinking about myself to the point where I become so irritable, restless, and discontent that the only thing that can help me get through that is a drink of alcohol. And both of those are what qualifies me as an alcoholic. Done.
Question 3. What does the concept of anonymity mean to you?
The concept of anonymity means to me that I don't divulge to anyone outside the program my last name, my affiliation with AA, that I'm a servant of AA, and that I remain anonymous. And I suppose that means just not letting people know my direct affiliation with Alcoholics Anonymous. Done.
Question number 4. Please give us a brief sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit.
Wow, a brief sketch of my drinking career. I started drinking at 14 or 15. My first drink was uneventful. I don't remember much of it, but I do remember my second time drinking, and I drank, it was a warm summer day in Sacramento, and I remember drinking an Old English 40, and quickly that turned into 3 40s. Woke up on my neighbor's lawn. Woke up to red and blue lights, got in trouble right off the bat, and I could tell you that it was different throughout the next 15 years of my drinking, but the only thing that really changed was people, places, or things. As soon as I started drinking alcohol, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I would either wake up on my neighbor's lawn, or I would go home and pass out, or maybe blackout. I really didn't know what I was getting. It was truly a roll of the dice, and fortunately I ended up in here and found a solution to living. But prior to that, it was just just a lot of fun, and then fun with problems, and then just problems. Done.
Okay. Question number 6. What are the conditions of your mind and body that accompany your alcoholism?
The conditions that accompany my mind and body with alcoholism. Well, the mind, the alcoholic mind I would describe as obsessive thinking. Self-will run right is something that comes to mind. Just thinking about myself, pursuing self-interest at the expense of everybody around me, and not really worried about who's in my path and what the repercussions are. And then the body, I would describe more as the physical allergy of when I start drinking, things spiral pretty quickly, and I really don't know when that off switch is going to get flipped, but I certainly know I'm off to the races as soon as I start drinking. Done.
In your understanding, what is the role of a sponsor?
The role of a sponsor is to take you through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, hopefully with urgency. That was something that was taught to me early on, is it's not just about going through the program and the steps. It is doing so with a sense of urgency, because the window of willingness is fast closing in this program. So that's the role of the sponsor. The sponsor is not a life coach, not a dating coach, not a marriage counselor, certainly not a financial coach of any means, but is qualified to take someone through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous if they have been through the 12 steps with the sponsor. Done.
How often are you in contact with your sponsor?
I am in contact with my sponsor weekly, several times a week. I can't say that I make everyday calls, although that was how I started off in the program. I'd say right now I'm communicating with my sponsor 2 or 3 times a week by phone. We usually do a 10-step inventory where we'll go through anything, fear, resentments, harms done, anything that's relevant. And I try to see him once or twice a month up at his home group. Done.
How have your sponsorship needs changed from early sobriety until now?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in sobriety, my sponsorship needs were, I really needed somebody to sit and listen to me, to empathize with how I felt, to share their experience. And I can't really say a whole lot has changed from that, but I can say that because I've been given a set of tools to use to work through the ups and downs in life, I don't rely on a sponsor as much, because I first start off with prayer, meditation, calling another alcoholic, attending a meeting. And if whatever I'm working through doesn't get solved through that process, I have my sponsor there as kind of a backstop. So I think in the beginning I leaned more on a sponsor as my first line of defense, whereas now it's, I wouldn't say my last line of defense, but I start with the tools that I've been given and can work on my own. Done.
Have you completed the 12 steps? And if so, what is your suggested time frame for completing the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous?
I have completed the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would suggest, urgency is different for everyone. I would stress urgency as just simply being committed beyond convenience. So doing the work beyond what's convenient to you. I think for me, my early experience in sobriety working the steps, I would have taken a full year to do them because it would have been comfortable. My sponsor took me through the 12 steps in 4 months. I try to take a sponsee through the steps 1 step a week. I know that varies by individual, but I do try to move quickly because I have experienced people going out, sponsees, seeing even folks that have a lot of time in this program go out because they didn't either continue to work the steps or failed to work the steps with urgency when they first came in, and eventually that willingness does go away. So we have to make sure we have a solution to solve alcoholism, because just meeting attendance doesn't solve it. Done.
In your own words, please describe steps 1, 2, and 3.
Steps 1, 2, and 3. So step 1 was described to me as the problem step. When we come into Alcoholics Anonymous, we have actually 2 problems. I thought my first problem was, or my only problem was alcohol. And once I removed alcohol, everything would be fine. Turns out that when I stopped drinking, things actually get worse for me. So that was very revealing, very telling of what my second problem is and what step 1 describes, which is myself, my thinking. I am an alcoholic because I have 2 problems, and step 1 describes alcohol and myself. Step 2 describes what the solution is. It's a power greater than ourselves. And then step 3 was described as, step 1 would be problem, step 2 would be solution, step 3 is the path that we're going to pursue our solution, which is God. And it's a simple decision of, left or right. I've gone right my whole life. It has led to dead ends. I'm simply choosing to go left, and that first step becomes step 4. Done.
Thank you. What does your unmanageability and self-will look like?
Unmanageability and self-will looks like obsessive thoughts, and this is definitely if I'm not working the program and doing what's outlined in the 12 steps. I would say obsessive thoughts, fear. Fear is the first thing that comes back to me. And once fear starts coming back, I become driven by self-will, thinking I can solve all my problems and I need to do so immediately. And I become driven by ego. So the things that matter most are external things versus an internal connection with a higher power. And I pursue external things to the point of feeling irritable, restless, discontent, and driving myself into the ground where, again, I wind up at the exact same spot I came in. I'm too miserable to do anything. I either need to jump off a bridge or pick up a drink. And, that's happened to me very few times in sobriety, but I'd be lying if I said it hasn't happened. And pain is a big motivator for me, and it's pushed me back into the steps. But, by the grace of God, that was the action I took, because I've seen others, choose the other two paths. So, done.
What is your concept of power greater than yourself, and how are you turning your will and your life over to it?
The concept of a power greater than myself is, well, I should just say I started off believing it was AA, because clearly there was something here that I didn't have and I wanted, and it was a solution to something that I couldn't solve on my own. So I believed there was strength in these rooms. And my conception from there has evolved into more of a loving relationship of trust with a higher power, that if I do what is outlined in this program, if I am of service to others, that I will be taken care of. And it's really become a love-trust relationship, and that's evolved into what my new conception of a higher power is. And the second part of that question was?
And how are you turning your will and your life over to it?
Yeah, and that's the challenge. It's a daily activity. So this is a discipline that we practice in AA. When we practice the 12 steps, it's a day-to-day thing. So today I can tell you what I did today. I woke up, I did a gratitude list, I said a prayer, I went about my day, I prayed before I came in here of, hopefully being honest and being of service. I know there's some things I have to do tonight. I have to call my sponsor, I have to call a sponsee back, and I'm looking for what opportunities there are to be of service in ways that God could use me to be of help, rather than ways that I've been wronged or ways my life is not meeting my expectations. Done.
Please briefly describe your experience with steps 4 and 5.
Yeah, my experience with step 4, I remember I was in Bethesda, Maryland. I was in a basement apartment, and my sponsor had met me down there, and he came over at about 8 o'clock at night. I had several pages of inventory to go through with him, and we spent about 4 or 5 hours going through all these. And, I can tell you that is truly the first time in my life I've ever shared everything with one person. I think there were, spread out between among maybe 5 or 10 people. Yeah, maybe I did tell all of it to little bits and pieces to different individuals, but I told everything to that sponsor. And, some of the things that came out of that were, I got to see, one, a pattern of my behavior, and that I had played a part in nearly everything that had happened in my life, whereas before I thought I was a victim and that these things had happened to me. I also got to learn that other alcoholics had similar experiences than I did, or, to me, also doing things just as bad, if not worse, and my sponsor shared those experiences with me, so it wasn't just me throwing up everything that I had experienced, it was also him sharing his experiences. And I still remember him telling me that he was kidnapped and held for ransom for drug money. And I thought, wow, maybe I didn't have it as bad as I thought I did. But, and everybody has different experiences and stories. But I felt a true connection with people, with this community, and with a higher power after being truly honest with another human being in step 5. Done.
What does the exact nature of our wrongs mean to you?
The exact nature of our wrongs, I think that's a tough question, but I think it comes down to causes and conditions. It really has to do with breaking down the wrong to its most fundamental level of, if I were to have stolen something from somebody, obviously the wrong is theft, and I stole from someone, and that's a very clear one. But if it's a a relationship that maybe went awry, or maybe the wrong isn't as clear, it really does have to be spelled out and broken down into its truest form, so I can understand what defect is at play and also what my part is. And every situation is different, but the good thing about understanding what the exact nature of your wrongs is you have a sponsor to help walk you through that, and you don't have to figure that all out on your own. Everything in AA is done with the sponsor-sponsee relationship, so there's not a lot of guesswork that has to happen. It can be a back and forth process, and it can be engaging, and through the sharing of one alcoholic to another, the causes and conditions can be uncovered. Done.
Please briefly describe, in your own words, steps 6 and 7.
Yeah, so after step 5, we have a list of defects. So we've been able to identify a pattern through our inventory. We create an inventory. We've shared it with another person. Through evaluating my part, I'm able to see some character defects that are prevalent throughout my past and even present. So step 6, I am essentially turning these over to God. And all that we need in step 6 is willingness. And in order to be entirely ready, that really is all that's prescribed. You have to be willing to let them go. And I was told, early on, and even told today, that if I'm not willing to let go of that defect, I pray for willingness. And step 7 is a following through with a prayer, the step 7 prayer to have our defects removed. And I think the most important thing that can be taken away from step 6 and 7 is that it's not a process that I do on my own. I don't change myself. I don't change these defects that have caused me harm in my life. It's something that God does, and God does in time. I just need to be aware of them, and I need to be accountable to them with a sponsor. Done.
What are some of your character defects, and are they being removed?
They are definitely being removed. My character defects that I'm aware of today, and they're different. They're not different than when I first came in, but the ones that I'm aware of today that are wreaking havoc in my life are maybe different ones than when I started. The ones that I'm most aware of today: procrastination, which I was told is lazy in 5 syllables, and surprisingly, jealousy is one that I didn't actually have for a long time, but sure enough, there it is, and it's cropping up more regularly, and I have to be accountable to that. And because I've done an inventory with my sponsor, and I've identified that as a character defect, I now see it much more in my life because of the accountability process of an inventory. And when it does pop up, I talk to my sponsor about it. We have a process to turn that over to God. We pray, and we move on with our lives, hoping to do better next time. Done.
Please briefly describe steps 8 and 9.
So after we turned over our character defects and we've asked God to remove our shortcomings, we begin to make amends to those we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And these are, it says in the big book that this list was made when we did our inventory. So we refer back to our inventory when doing steps 8 and 9. And the willingness again comes up in step 8, became willing to make amends to them all. And the list, I was told by a sponsor, and my sponsor today, I've had different sponsors in the program, but all of them have told me that when we make amends and we go through the amends process, it's done with a sponsor, and the guidance of who to make amends to and what an amends is proper or sufficient is decided between a sponsor and a sponsee, and that's a process that's done together. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. That really just comes down to once that list has been identified from step 4 and we determine who we're making amends to, we're taking action and we're following through on the amends. And some of those are direct amends, as it says, made direct amends wherever possible. But also we've identified which ones cause injury to others, and there typically is an amends to be made, but it looks different than a direct amends. Done.
Why is it important for you to straighten out your past?
some things I figured out over the past 9 years of sobriety is that the things that don't get sorted out seem to come back and have a way of revealing themselves to you if you don't take care of them. And I didn't know that when I first came into sobriety. I thought what was in the past stayed in the past. And when I got sober, I started to see that either behaviors would come back again or relationships that, possibly that I had burnt to the ground, or issues that I had unresolved from the past would reveal themselves. And I also had to pay the emotional consequences of that and the spiritual consequences of that. So I was paying a pretty hefty toll on my spirit because of things that had happened in the past. And ultimately, those things will drive me to drink again. And it was explained to me by a sponsor that was outlined in AA, and that was something that we took care of through the amends process. So when I came in here, I was so desperate, I was willing to do anything, and I followed through with most of them. But sure enough, years later, I started to see, there were things that I missed on my amends, and they, sure enough, were right in front of me. And I realized I had more work to do, but the past will come back, and it definitely did for me. And fortunately, I had a sponsor and a way to work through that with the steps and a way to address that. Done.
When you were actively drinking, did you drink whiskey in your milk?
I have not had whiskey in milk. I've never even heard of anyone drinking that until I read that out of the big book. But there were times in early sobriety I thought, wow, maybe that does taste good. Maybe that's something I should have tried. And no, the answer is no, I have not. Done.
Please briefly describe your experience with steps 10 and 11.
With steps 10 and 11, so step 10, taking a personal inventory. I was explained through steps 4 and 5 that we have, because of our past, we've gained, we have a lot of things that we have to share and put down on paper, and some of those are good and some of those are bad, and we do a full inventory. And step 10 was described as a process to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, as anything crops up in our life, that we have a process for getting rid of those things. If they're fears, their harms done, resentment, anything that pops up, we have a process to get rid of those so we don't have to accumulate that same baggage that we had come into AA with. And step 11 was finding another tool and another way to strengthen our bond with our higher power, which was getting quiet and communicating through prayer, and very effective ways to, for me, quiet the thoughts in my head and build on that relationship that I started in step 3. Done.
What does meditation mean to you, and how do you practice it?
Meditation to me is quieting my thoughts, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting in a yoga pose and, taking 30, 45 minutes to be quiet. It actually can be done just with some deep breaths. It can be done in the car, as long as the car's not moving. And it can be, something I even do when I exercise, where my thoughts become quiet and I'm just mindful of the present moment. Something that's always been helpful, I'd say recently, is using some of the meditation apps that are out right now. And I use a meditation app, and it's very effective, and it's guided meditation, and it really takes the guesswork out of the breathing, the time, because it has an alarm built in, and making sure that as my thoughts stray, which typically happens, that I'm brought back to my breath and remaining in the present moment. Done.
Please briefly describe step 12.
So since I've gone through the first 11 steps and I've had a spiritual awakening from working the program, now that I have come out the other end of this and have become a changed person, and the obsession to drink has been lifted, I now have a purpose in AA, and that purpose is to carry the message and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. I still remember my first year of sobriety calling my sponsor, and he asked me if I had gone to a meeting that day, and I said, no, I haven't. I feel great. And his response was, well, maybe somebody else isn't feeling great. And it helped me understand that my purpose from that point on was not to be a taker in AA, it was to be a giver, because I had something to give at that point. So when I attend meetings after having worked the steps, I now have a purpose in that meeting. It's to carry a message of hope, strengthen recovery, and to help any other alcoholics who may be struggling, whether they be newcomers or people who have been around the program a while. Done.
Can you share with us a spiritual experience you have had as a result of these steps?
Yeah, the spiritual experience started even the first day I came into AA willingly. I had come in before with a court sheet, and surprisingly, I didn't get any of the magic that happens here at AA, but I did come back willingly, and I can tell you from the first meeting, the obsession to drink was lifted that first day for me, and I think it had to do with the fact that when I came into AA, it was a choice between jumping off a bridge or going to AA, and given the state of mind that I was in, that was actually a really hard decision to go to AA, because I thought, my life's over if I come in here anyway. And the spiritual awakening has really just continued to grow from there. I had a spiritual awakening when I went through steps 4 and 5 with the sponsor, where I was honest with another human being and got to see my part in my life and where it's led to. And I think step 9 has been probably the most eye-opening or spiritually awakening step for me, is when I then went to someone and owned my part and asked what I could do to make it right. And a sponsor also explained step 9 that it wasn't an apology, it was an amend, it was a change of behavior. And through changing my behavior, I continue to have a spiritual awakening through this program. Done.
What is the message of AA, and why is it important to carry this message?
The message of AA is, well, I guess it would be that if you have a desire to stop drinking, that you have a place that you can come and find recovery. There's hope in these rooms. There's definitely strength, recovery, sobriety in these rooms. And there is a path that anyone who comes in here with the desire to stop drinking and a willingness to work the program can find a solution. And why is it important? Well, selfishly, it helps me stay sober. But more importantly, it's a way to help another person carry on the message, walk through the program, and then carry the message to someone else and save lives, because that's what we do here. Done.
What are some of the principles you are practicing in your affairs today?
Pass.
Why is it important to put the welfare of others ahead of your own?
When I think of putting the welfare of others ahead of my own, I think of step 12, and really about service, putting other people, not necessarily putting them ahead of the needs that I have in my life, but making sure that I'm involved and that they understand that I can be of service and I am of service to them if they need it. Done.
How do you determine or gauge the quality of your sobriety in AA?
Well, it's a one day at a time program, and there really isn't a measuring stick. You don't get stars for every action that you take during the day. It's really a wake up, turn your life over to God, do the best that you can in terms of being of service. Whatever God puts in front of you that day, or whatever God puts in front of me that day, I try to do willingly and of service, and trying to carry the principles throughout my day. I definitely don't do that perfectly, and if I mess up, I have a process to get honest about that and to try again tomorrow. And that's really what the program is. It's not about being perfect. It's about a willingness to continue doing it one day at a time. Done.
Why do you think alcoholics relapse?
I believe alcoholics relapse because they no longer have a direct connection with their higher power. And I definitely believe, as the steps outline, that the solution is finding a power greater than ourselves and building that spiritual connection. And it's very easy to rest on our laurels and not continue to build our spiritual program of action. And if that takes place, whether you're going to meetings or not, you'll eventually get to a point where you're spiritually empty, and a thought will come into your mind that drinking will make this better, or maybe I wasn't an alcoholic, or maybe my life would be better if I were out at the bar right now. And those insane thoughts can become reality in a day's time if we're not doing our program and staying vigilant. So, done.
Are you willing and able to sponsor other members currently?
I'm absolutely willing to sponsor anyone that's looking to work through the 12 steps. And when I sponsor someone, I ask them two questions. Do they have a desire to stop drinking, and are they willing to go to any lengths for their sobriety? And from my experience, the answers to both of those need to be yes to find somebody to work through the program. Other than that, I try to put my number out, and I'm willing to talk with people if they're trying to figure out if AA is right for them or they're in the initial stages. But to work the program, those need to be there. Done.
Presently, what is the most important activity in your recovery program?
Presently, the most important activity in my program is, I still say it's day. I try to go to meetings most days, and I still equate it to going to the gym. If you just show up, you're probably going to do something, but you have to show up. And AA, for me, I've always connected it with you have to show up every day to AA. Not necessarily to a meeting, but you have to show up and be willing. And I find that if I'm at a meeting, I catch a message, and I can carry a message if I catch the message, and it reminds me that prayer is part of my day, that connecting with my sponsor is a daily activity, and also that there's other people that have real issues going on, and sometimes that stuff in my head isn't real stuff. It's just, it fills time, but it's actually not a problem. It's just something that I'm obsessed with for that moment. And so it brings me back down and gives me perspective. Done.
Would you please generally describe the purpose of the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous?
So I was told that the first 12 steps of recovery are what could guide an individual from their hopeless state when they come in through it to a spiritual experience. The 12 traditions ensures that a meeting and a meeting structure can grow and thrive, and more or less, if we go into an AA meeting in Placerville, California, and Roseville, California, that we're essentially getting the same product, not watered down. And it allows our meetings and fellowship to grow. And I've been to maybe 6 or 7 countries that had AA meetings, and that was the first thing I did when I checked into the country is I'm going to go to a meeting. And sure enough, there was a meeting there, and I walked in and they read how it works, and I felt right at home. And the traditions ensure that we have a fellowship that continues to carry a message with integrity, without boundaries. Done.
Can you give us some examples of meeting etiquette?
I know what violations of etiquette are. I was told crosstalk is one, but I have been to meetings where crosstalk is allowed, so I guess that's not one. I think it really has to do with intent and making sure that you're respectful of people in these rooms and wherever they are in their journey, understanding that everybody in here may not be where I am, where my neighbor is, where my friend is, but everybody deserves that right to pursue a path to getting clean and sober. And knowing that, it's just some basic etiquette is welcoming a newcomer. If there's somebody that walks in, making sure they feel welcome. I think that's one of the biggest and most important, that less than what I'm dealing with and what I'm feeling is making sure that the people in the rooms that do attend a meeting feel welcome, safe, and heard if they need to be heard. Done.
What role models do you have in sobriety?
Role models in sobriety. Well, for starters, my sponsor. This guy, I absolutely love this guy. I first met him in 2006 in my DUI class. I had no intention on quitting drinking, and through a 9-month alcohol program, I was in the master's program as ordered by the state of California. He spent time with me every week, and he stuck his hand out, and I'm just so grateful that he planted the seeds with me before I was ready to stop drinking, because he really ruined my drinking for me. And when I came in 2009, I still remember the things he told me. Things like, you need to have a drinking plan, Brian. And I would make a drinking plan every time I went out. And it was a great plan until I started drinking. And then and I didn't understand that, once I start drinking, it's a different person making the plan. And I just didn't understand that. And I truly respect and love the guy. And of course, friends that I have in the program, I've met so many amazing people. But honestly, I look up to anybody who, after the meeting, goes right up to the newcomer and asks them how they're doing and gives their number. And I always admire that because, it doesn't matter how long you've been here. It still takes some courage and, some trust to put yourself out there to help someone else. So I always admire that. Done.
What advice do you have for newcomers in AA?
Advice, get a sponsor. First thing, get a sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor, get one, because your days will be numbered without it. And that's not trying to scare anyone, but it's just the truth. You have to do this with a sponsor. Advice, it doesn't have to be a perfect sponsor. They don't exist. And if you're worried about picking the wrong one, pick a temporary sponsor. Just get someone that can get you going on the steps. The next thing I would say is get a service commitment. Make a commitment to attending AA. My first month and a half in the program was, I really approached it as I'll show up when I want and I'll go, here and there. And that gave me the ability to not get to know anyone in AA, but give the appearance that I was attending. And it doesn't work like that. And I did that when I was drinking. I avoided relationships. I didn't want to socially connect with people. I felt awkward in groups, and it was incredibly uncomfortable to do that in AA, but putting yourself out there and realizing that you're in a room with people that also feel the same way, I think it's going to help. But, put yourself out there, get a sponsor, get a commitment, and keep that willingness and continue to work through the steps. Done.
What advice do you have for old-timers in AA?
For old-timers in AA, I would say don't leave the rooms. I've heard some stories recently about some folks that have been around the program a long time and they stop coming as often. And we need old-timers to give hope to a lot of us that have been around a while, to the newcomers, that you can live a life of sobriety and well into either old age or lengthy amounts of sobriety. And I would say that right off the bat. And then don't stop telling your story. I mean, I think that's a really important thing too. Old timers putting their hand out and being willing to share their story, because I can say for me, it's incredibly motivating to hear somebody that's maybe in their 60s or 70s, or just somebody who has more time than me in the program, share a totally different experience, but something that I can completely relate to and look up to and aspire to in this program. Done.
Can you please describe what this experience was like?
I assume this experience is the interview.
Yes, correct.
What was this experience like? It started off a little uncomfortable just because of the format, but I really like the questions. I think they're well thought out questions. I think the answers to these questions, I think every alcoholic should go through this process. I think it's a fact finding and a revealing process about someone's journey through AA. Done. All right. I did good on time. Did you go over by like an hour?
Yes.
I believe that.
From the old preamble, I wish to remind you that whatever is said at this meeting expresses our own individual opinion as of today and as of up to this moment. We do not speak for AA as a whole, and you are free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it is suggested that you pay no attention to anything which might not be reconciled with what is in the AA Big Book. If you don't have a big book, it's time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it, loan it, scatter it, and then learn from it what it means to be in AA.